Okay, we're open and the meeting started.
Lovely, thank you. Okay. I think we'll just wait a couple of minutes to see if anybody else is joining us. Good afternoon. I think we will start the meeting. It seems that we've only got a small number of people joining us. So I'd just like to say good afternoon. My name is Brianne Stolper and I'm a Principal Planning Officer in the Planning Policy team. I'd like to welcome you to the overview of Acton for the Draft Regulation 19 Local Plan, and thank you for joining us today. We will be recording this webinar and the recording and slides will be uploaded to the new local plan page in the next couple of days. We will be taking questions after the presentation. However, if you want to pop your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, that's absolutely fine. You can also raise your hand and I can bring you in to voice your question after the presentation if you would prefer. Steve Barton, the planning policy team leader, is going to go through what the new local plan is and the structure of the document, and then he'll go into details about proposals for Acton. And today we're joined by our colleague Catherine Howe from Area Regeneration. So Steve, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Brianne. I'm Steve Barton. I'm the Strategic Planning Manager for Ealing Council, and I lead the team responsible for producing the local plan. So I'm going to provide a bit of context, explain a bit about the background to town plans, take you through the Acton town plan itself. I'll then say a little bit about Chapter 5 DM policies, and then about the community infrastructure levy, which we're consulting upon alongside the local plan, and then explain how you can provide feedback to both. So starting then with what the local plan is, it's obviously a very key, significant document for the council, helping us to shape future growth and development across the borough. It sets out a vision, priorities, and a planning policy framework for future development in line with the council's corporate plan. And local plan should create certainty and confidence for local communities and businesses and investors about the sorts of development that will be appropriate and some of their suitable locations. The local plan must be prepared in line with requirements set by government and by the Mayor of London, and so our local plan will sit alongside the London plan. It covers a 15-year period up until 2039 and must be reviewed every 5 years. Now, any list of highlights is clearly obviously a very subjective view in terms of the wide variety of complex policies that sit within the plan. Some of my personal favourites are on this slide. I think the most important thing in the local plan personally is the emphasis on place shaping, place making, on the regeneration of our existing town centres, and indeed proposals to create some new ones. We adopt an approach that looks at each of the 7 geographies that make up the borough, with the view that Ealing shouldn't be a dormitory suburb of central London. We want to obviously have jobs, employment sustained and growing in this borough. We also want to ensure that no town is left behind, that every town is able to share in future growth and prosperity. but also that no town does a disproportionate share of the heavy lifting. There are policies which promote active travel and the concept of the 20-minute neighbourhood, a suite of policies around affordable housing. Just to highlight one, we propose to raise the fast-track threshold for viability assessments for affordable housing from 35% in the current London plan to 40%. And another key policy seeks to close a loophole. So minor developments, i.e. developments which deliver less than 10 units, provide, believe it or not, no contributions toward affordable housing, and we think they should make a contribution. There are also a range of policies about safeguarding, protecting and enhancing employment areas in the borough, and seeking to promote and encourage affordable workspace. We take a robust approach to tall buildings. We set out the locations which we deem to be suitable, and we set broad threshold ranges. There is a very ambitious and new suite of climate action policies, including on whole life carbon. We set out very detailed design principles and infrastructure requirements for each of the 84 site allocations or development sites that have made it through to this iteration of the plan. And then finally, we also set out our proposals for a new community infrastructure levy, effectively a tariff or tax on future development, which will enable us to help fund the infrastructure that we deem necessary and required to support future growth. This slide illustrates the broad structure and format of the local plan. And the most important thing to take away from this slide is the London plan is an integral part of our local development plan. So there's no need to replicate or duplicate policies in the London plan. It's already a very sizable document. The local plan itself then starts off with a couple of chapters which provide context and the relationship between the local plan and the council's corporate plan. In chapter 3, it begins to get interesting because we start to introduce some planning policies, and we set out our overall spatial strategy for the borough, including our vision, key strategic objectives and a high-level key diagram. Chapter 4 is where the bulk of text and information is provided. This is our collection of the 7 town plans which set out broad issues and opportunities that beset each of the geographies and set out an overall vision, strategy and spatial policies for each of the towns, together with a portfolio of development sites. Chapter 5 is our rather slim development management policy document. These are the criteria-based policies that are used to help determine individual planning applications alongside the London plan. And then sitting alongside the London plan, the local plan, is the policies map, and all that seeks to do is to illustrate on a map base the various planning policy designations. Now, I would also point you helpfully to 2 other sources of information available from our local plan landing page. Firstly, a wayfinding guide. So if you're particularly interested in a particular suite or theme of policies, it will help you navigate between the London plan and our local plan so that you're able to get the full policy coverage. Similarly, we also have an atlas of change which seeks to outline and describe in detail each of the individual planning policy designation changes that we are promoting. And this is most helpfully shown on an interactive policies map, which will enable you to plug in your address and see planning policy designations or development sites, for example, in your immediate locality. All of that, as I say, is available from our local plan landing page. So this slide illustrates the broad planning framework. So national planning policy, of course, is set by government, and that's embodied in the National Planning Policy Framework and associated guidance. Then we have the Mayor of London, who produces a spatial development strategy for the capital city and associated supplementary planning guidance. And our local plan must be in general conformity with the London plan. Sitting beneath the local plan are neighbourhood plans. We have 2 currently adopted and 2 in the pipeline. The important thing to say is the local plan, in terms of its geographical scope and coverage, does not cover the entire geography of the London Borough of Ealing. And this is because in the northeast corner of the borough, there is a mayoral development corporation called the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation, which has its own separate local plan making powers and has indeed adopted its own local plan. So we are not able to set planning policies for that part of the borough, although in the Acton Town Plan, we do talk about working collaboratively with OPDC to deliver on a number of shared aspirations, which I'll talk about in due course. So this slide illustrates the stages in the preparation of the local plan. We're at stage 5, Reg 19, or as I prefer to call it, our final set of proposals. And before we got here, we started with a round of shaping Ealing consultation, where we asked people what did they like about their existing town centres and what things needed to change. That, together with a whole host of technical evidence gathering, helped inform our Reg 18 local plan, to call it, our initial draft proposals. That was consulted upon from the end of November 2022 for 10 weeks until February 2023, and together with a separate, more technical round of consultation on a particular issue in the summer of 2023, together netted more than 14,000 responses from the local community, from the public, from stakeholders. All of that helped shape and inform, together with the further evidence base that we gathered, the version of the plan that is now out to consultation. And subject to the end of this consultation period, the council will then consider again carefully any feedback that we receive before submitting the plan, the entire evidence base, and the feedback that we get at this stage to the Secretary of State for independent examination. And an examiner will then be appointed to test whether the plan meets various tests around legal compliance and tests of soundness, and subject to his or her report, it will then be open to the council to adopt the final version of the local plan, together with any modifications that have been proposed by the inspector. Now, I currently anticipate submission will take place in the summer. I'm aiming for the end of June. Of course, that will depend on the volume of representations we receive and their scope. And then again, on the examination, we're hoping and anticipating we will get to the adoption stage by the summer of next year, although of course that will be entirely dependent on the recommendations and conclusion and the time taken to conduct the examination by the independent inspector. So this slide then makes the point around the priorities that exist in the local plan, and there are 3 overarching strategic objectives, which are like golden threads in the local plan, around climate action, fighting inequality, and creating good jobs and growth. And these are drawn from the council's corporate plan that was agreed in 2022. And sitting beneath each of these objectives are 3 additional priorities. And you'll find, particularly in chapters 3 and chapter 4, these are reflected in the structure and format of the document. Chapter 3 then is when we start to introduce planning policies, including the overall vision. And the vision is very much one based on trying to ensure more balanced growth, so that all towns within Ealing share in the future growth and prosperity of the borough. And that's illustrated in a key diagram. No surprises that clearly great emphasis, great store taken on our town centres, many of which of course are existing and are retained, but with the introduction of 2 new ones at the current White Hart roundabout, a neighbourhood centre there, and in the environs of Perivale station. So turning then to chapter 4. So chapter 4, as I say, is the bulk of the text in the plan. And we start from the premise that each of our 7 towns has a very differing local identity with unique sets of characteristics, of challenges, of opportunities. And how can we ensure that each town shares in the future prosperity of the borough? And how can we ensure that growth is more balanced across the borough, so that no town is left behind and no town is doing perhaps a disproportionate share of the heavy lifting? And each town plan is broadly structured into 4 sections, some contextual information about some of the key issues and technical evidence base that we've gathered, some of which of course has come from the Shaping Ealing consultation, if you like a sort of spatial portrait of each town. Then a town spatial strategy, which shows how our borough-wide strategy in chapter 3 will be articulated and translated into town-specific policies and strategies. Then a series of town-specific spatial policies which set out policy relating to particular parts of each town. And then finally, the development sites. Those are the specific sites or locations that have been identified that are deemed to be critical to delivering on our overall objectives, particularly around more homes, sustaining and creating jobs, and providing necessary infrastructure. So now turning then to the Acton town plan itself. So Acton town today is a diverse town with a population of nearly 68,000 residents, with contrasting levels of deprivation with some of the least and the most deprived neighbourhoods nationally. Indeed, areas of South Acton and North Acton are amongst the 10 to 20% most deprived neighbourhoods nationally. By way of contrast, though, some of the areas between South Acton and Acton Town Station, around Southfield, score consistently as one of the least deprived wards in the borough. Acton, of course, is very well connected, benefits from proximity to the strategic road network, and that includes the radial corridors of the A40 and the Uxbridge Road. However, owing to the presence of these road corridors and the historical rail networks, parts of Acton do suffer from high levels of severance at a local scale. Acton is also home to many vibrant town centres and shopping parades. Surrounding these town centres are mostly comprised of fine-grained residential typologies with 7 conservation areas, 4 zones of archaeological interest, and a significant number of listed buildings. Acton is also the location of significant industrial activity with employment space and locally significant industrial sites at South Acton and the Vale, close to Acton's historic town centre. Acton is also home to a creative enterprise zone that aims to support artists and new creative businesses to find affordable workspace within the borough. And Acton includes, as I said at the beginning, a sizable part of the area covered by the Old Oakham Park Royal Development Corporation, which includes North Acton, much of Park Royal. And the OPDC aims to deliver almost 14,000 new homes and create over 36,000 new jobs over its planned period, creating more than 250,000 square metres of extra industrial floor space. So North Acton, of course, is a key gateway and a strategic transition area from the rest of Acton into the wider opportunity being delivered as part of the OPDC's local plan. So this creates an opportunity for all Acton residents and businesses to directly benefit from this, and Ealing Council continues to help shape future plans for that area with the OPDC. Looking at some of the challenges and opportunities for the town, Acton is the least affordable town in the borough, particularly when taking into consideration the incomes of local people and the cost of housing. And this is largely as a result of its location closer to central London, which seeks to drive up housing prices. There is also increasing pressure on industrial conversion to residential uses, which risks compromising Acton's key role as a sort of economic driver for the borough. High demand for industrial workspace is impacting affordability and resulting in some sectors being pushed out. The impact of this is already being seen within Acton, which has experienced stagnant and declining economic growth over the past 5 years. Indeed, the number of jobs in Acton has declined by 13% over this period, with the decline primarily within industrial construction, transport, ICT, media, and creative employment sectors. Now, whilst Acton has many historically vibrant town centres, these areas have been experiencing varying levels of decline with high vacancy rates, and this is a result of increased competition with nearby centres for footfall, including Ealing Broadway itself, White City, Westfield, and Shepherd's Bush. Acton's smaller neighbourhood centres have a limited retail offer, including convenience and fast food uses, and they have higher than average vacancy rates. The A40 and the Uxbridge Road are the main arterial routes within Acton, focused on moving high volumes of traffic into and out of central London. And these routes have caused local severance between neighbourhoods in the town, creating north-south movement issues. And insufficient investment historically in active travel infrastructure in Acton for pedestrians and for cycling has led to some areas having poor access to existing amenities, including green space. But Acton also enjoys many opportunities. Whilst Acton has suffered from economic decline, particularly within the industrial sector, it continues to have a strong industrial business base with specialisms in food, manufacturing, wholesale, transport and storage that provides potential scope for future growth. The evolving industrial and creative sectors within Acton in particular provide further opportunities to explore co-location of light industrial and residential uses that could provide valuable economic activity, help boost wages and provide homes closer to where people work. Whilst Acton town centres are vibrant and provide a range of leisure, community and local services valued by local residents, there's opportunity to build upon these assets to create more complete communities. Acton has a mix of housing types that cater to different groups. However, there's an opportunity to provide a wider range of both housing types and tenures. So turning to the vision for Acton, Acton has a diverse community with a thriving creative sector. There is a community-led ambition to champion Acton's cultural life, to build on its unique identity and to use culture as a catalyst to bring visitors to the town. So growth should capitalise on Acton's strategic location, the Elizabeth Line connections to central London and Heathrow at Acton Main Line Station, and its proximity to the future High Speed 2 station at Old Oak Common to maximise economic opportunities for the area. And the delivery of moderate levels of development is possible along key north-south corridors in Acton, particularly along the proposed West London orbital route, with an emphasis on integrating development and encouraging growth based on local needs. And growth will therefore be concentrated close to transport interchanges, including Acton Main Line, Acton Town, South Acton and Acton Central, which benefit from both existing and proposed connections. Investment in sustainable connectivity is clearly needed between neighbourhood centres, while Acton's green routes link open spaces locally with opportunities to connect and enhance natural corridors and biodiversity. The functional roles, therefore, of Acton District Centre and the East Acton Neighbourhood Centre will be enhanced through new mixed-use development to increase the vitality and viability of these centres. Acton Gardens will capitalise on its proximity to Acton Town Station and will be a focus for residential-led growth and regeneration. A new neighbourhood centre is proposed at Acton Mainline Centre and the nearby Friary Park estate, which will be part of the wider regeneration ambitions for this locality. The protection and intensification of industrial sites and employment opportunities alongside supporting increased activity with the town centres will help improve and enhance Acton's local economy. And finally, the council will work collaboratively with OPDC and other key stakeholders, firstly to address some of the issues of severance caused by the A40 and railway lines, but also to seek to maximise the potential opportunities that arise from the very significant development that's taking place around North Acton Station. So turning to the spatial strategy, creating new active travel interventions that reinforce north-south connectivity whilst improving the permeability of local neighbourhoods and supporting health and environmental outcomes is a key part of the strategy, as is promoting and enhancing Acton's parks, including better accessibility and creating green links to connect parks and open spaces, creating a circular economy hub at Stirling Road to help promote waste reduction and behaviour changes towards zero waste and reuse, enhancing Acton's health and infrastructure, supporting and enhancing Acton's strong industrial base, and addressing some of the specific housing needs of Acton residents by delivering more generally affordable housing to help tackle deprivation and low incomes. And finally, the plan sets out some of the key infrastructure delivery priorities for the town. This is represented on a key diagram for the town. And then there are a series of spatial policies to enhance Acton's role as a district centre, to actively manage the transformation of South Acton, to create a new neighbourhood centre at Acton Mainline Station and environs, and exploring the potential for mixed-use development at Acton sidings, to enhance the role and function of East Acton Neighbourhood Centre, and to work collaboratively with the OPDC. There are 8 development sites, so that's 5 less than we consulted upon at Reg 18, and 3 of those development sites are considered potentially suitable for a tall building, of which all 3 are considered to support developments of 10 stories or more. And this map illustrates where those development sites are in the town. So turning then to Chapter 5, Development Management Policies, there are 18 development management policies which sit alongside the London Plan and are the criteria-based policies that are used to help determine individual planning applications. And in the local plan, they take one of 2 forms. They're either local variations to existing London Plan policies or entirely new policies. And so this is the list of them. So it includes policies like design, robust approach on tall buildings, measures to support more affordable housing, to protect local jobs and employment space, measures to support open and green spaces, urban greening and biodiversity net gain, a suite of policies supporting our ambitious policies around climate action. So I also wanted to say something about community infrastructure levy. So at the same time as the local plan, separately we're consulting on a SIL draft charging schedule. So SIL, as I said, is this tax on future development, if you like, a sort of tariff. So its primary purpose is to gain financial contributions from certain types of development that will help fund new or improved strategic infrastructure, which we've identified is necessary to support the planned growth identified in the local plan. Now, it's very different from the existing regime of Section 106 insofar as it's a non-negotiable charge. So it creates much greater certainty about what new development will contribute to delivering the infrastructure that's needed in a much more consistent and more transparent way than Section 106 agreements, which are subject to site-by-site individual negotiation and legal agreements. Section 106, though, will continue in a more modest way, specifically used for site-specific mitigation and for non-infrastructure requirements of things like affordable housing and employment and skills funding. And Ealing is the last local planning authority in London to implement a SIL. And these are the rates, as you would expect. Residential tends to attract the highest values and viability levels. And so these rates reflect the different types of development. And it's also important to note that we set a slightly higher rate for residential development within the geography of the red line here, which is focused on Ealing Town. So if you want to have your say on the community infrastructure levy, go along to our local plan landing page and you'll find links from there. The deadline is 6 p.m. On the 10th of April. And that's exactly the same deadline for our local plan. If you go onto the local plan landing page, you'll also find links to a very helpful toolkit, which will help you understand and respond to the draft plan. And there are a number of ways in which you can send us feedback. Our preferred route is the representation form via SurveyMonkey. That's probably the easiest. Alternatively, feel free to download the original representation form, complete it, and send it back to us either by snail mail or by email, or you can just write to us either by email or by letter. And finally, just so you can also find hard copies of both the plan and the representation form at libraries across the borough and in the Customer Services Centre in Ealing. So to conclude then, you'll be pleased to know is my last slide, the next steps. So following the end of this public and stakeholder consultation exercise on the 10th of April, and after we've given very careful consideration again to the feedback that we receive, we will submit the plan, the entire evidence base and the feedback and our response to it to the Secretary of State for examination, if you like, a glorified public inquiry. Now, I should emphasise we cannot ourselves make changes to the plan, although we can suggest modifications based on the responses we receive to the inspector, but it will be the inspector who will decide whether or not those modifications are accepted and made to the plan. Minor modifications procedurally should not present too much difficulty. More significant modifications may require, at the inspector's behest, further rounds of public and stakeholder consultation. Now, the job of the inspector is to assess the local plan draft for legal compliance and against the so-called tests of soundness, which are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, which I've helpfully, again, reproduced for you on the local plan landing page. And so the examination will be structured around those issues and matters chosen by the inspector, not me, not the council, that the inspector wishes to be satisfied upon during the process. Now, as indicated right at the beginning, we're aiming to submit the plan for examination in the summer, currently aiming for the end of June, but of course that timetable will be very much dependent on the volume of responses we get and their scope. Now, the timetable once we submit is entirely set by the inspector, again, not by me, and the inspector will determine when the public hearing dates will be. The inspector will determine the agenda for any of those hearings, and the inspector will decide which witnesses he or she wishes to call to hear further witness testimony in addition to any written reps that may already have been provided. Now, my best guess is that those public hearings will probably take place towards the end of the year, as early as late autumn or at the beginning of the winter period, and possibly straddling Christmas early into 2025. And subject to the inspector's report, and assuming the local plan is found to be legally compliant and sound, it will then be open to full council to adopt the local plan, where it will obviously achieve full weight and materiality. And that's expected to happen, as I say, subject to the inspector's report, around the summer of next year. So you'll be pleased to know that's the end of my presentation. More than happy to take any questions if I'm able to answer them. So I'll hand back to Brianne.
Thank you very much, Steve. I see that nobody has actually put any questions in the chat. If you would like to ask any questions, please do raise your hand and I will unmute you. Are there any questions? Okay, Libby, I'm going to unmute you, Libby. You will need to switch on your microphone. Okay, there you go. Libby? You will need to unmute your microphone.
I think we've got the old sticky mute switch here, which
Have we?
We all suffer from occasionally.
It should be showing as unmuted. Not. Yep, Libby. Don't know what's going on there. Libby, can you unmute your microphone?
There's obviously a problem there, Brianne. So do you want to perhaps suggest that Libby put something in the chat?
Libby, could you put something in the chat? You should be unmuted, but I think you need to unmute yourself. I don't know. It's showing that that you're unmuted.
Do you want to ask anyone to come in whilst she tries to resolve that?
Does anybody else have a question? You'd like to raise your hand while we try and get Libby. Sorry. Libby? Ah, it looks like Libby might. Hello, Libby?
It does look like Libby should be able to unmute.
Yeah, she should be able to she should be able to unmute herself. Libby, you need to unmute yourself. Okay. Libby, if you can't unmute yourself, could you maybe type your question into the chat? She's saying she's joining on another machine and she has unmuted herself. Okay, we'll try again. Let's try. Okay, let's try that one. Libby, would you like to try again? I've got her on 2 now.
Oh, that looked like it was going to work.
did it?
Yeah, I saw the icon change. Libby, if you pressed a button there, I think that was going to work then.
I have
Perfect.
done.
Yes, hello.
We can hear you.
Hello. I can never do this. This happens every time I use Teams. I cannot unmute.
We can
I
hear
don't know
you
what
now,
it is.
Libby, if you'd like to go
Right.
ahead.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to leave this one meeting. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, loud and clear.
Right. I've just lost the stuff I was going to read from. Just a moment. Are you going to do any editing of? I just started. I've got a lot of questions, but I just started to read the first paragraph on Acton, and it was full of inconsistencies and repeats, and it's just reads terribly. So page 9798, 4.1.1. In addition to the northern part of East Acton is located within the local planning authority of Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. That should say North Acton and East Acton. There's all sorts of bits through that which I can send you, which just are not correct. They don't read properly. So I don't know what you want to do about whether you could leave it. And again, it says about about employment in South Acton. It's built on, there's hardly any employment left in South Acton. There's no works left there.
Well, that's not my understanding for South Acton, but certainly if there are errors.
When did you last go there, Steve? We've had another 2 places put in planning permission. It's almost all gone on the South Acton estate. Or Acton Gardens, if you want to call it that.
Well, there is, in terms of South Acton, the ELSIS, I think is what we're referring to specifically there, which is a locally significant industrial area. There is a master plan, which is has been agreed, which is seeking to ensure proper zoning of residential and industrial uses, and certainly industrial, and Catherine can I'm sure come in, is still very much part of
South Acton, South Acton, the old next Boller Lane around there, or do you mean South Acton further along the Uxbridge Road and south of the Uxbridge Road? Where do you mean?
Catherine, do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Shall I jump in there, Steve? But feel free to jump in as well. So in terms of the South Acton area that we're referring to here, it covers the LSIS area that you mentioned, Steve.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the master plan to retain and enhance and protect employment space within that area. And it's seen as a site for employment moving forwards as well. And also, just to note on the North Acton and East Acton comment that you made previously, Libby, the area that's actually included within the OPDC boundary just captures the North Acton town centre, and the East Acton town centre sits outside of that OPDC boundary. And just for that one reference there as well, if that's helpful.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean about town centres. There's a Sainsbury's and something else around North Acton Station. Is that the town centre?
That's part of OPDC, so we don't get into the town centre hierarchy, but I'm sure it will be a neighbourhood or local centre as applied in the London plan.
So everything that's built around, I understand everything that's built around the North Acton station is part of OPDC, because I go to the OPDC meetings as well.
Mm-hmm.
But are those figures counted in Ealing's figures or OPDC figures as a number of housing or whatever you put there? And is this double counting here, or what? Or does it take figures off Acton? Do we lose some?
I wish. No, in terms of housing delivery targets, we cannot count anything that's outside our local planning authority boundary. So that will count towards OPDC's housing delivery targets. So even though it's actually delivering, as you know, a very significant quantum of new residential development, or has done certainly in recent years, it doesn't count towards Ealing's local planning authorities' housing delivery test results. And so if, for example, you look at our 5-year land supply position statement, the associated housing trajectory, it's not including any of those North Acton sites. But the purpose of the policy, and the reason why I was explaining the relationship, is whilst we clearly have no locus for setting planning policy in that area, what happens in North Acton and OPDC has considerable impact beyond its boundaries. And so
Yes.
what we seek to do is to work collaboratively with them, particularly in terms of some of the infrastructure priorities that we've identified to try and deal with some of the issues around severance, but also to ensure that some of the economic benefits of some of the employment generating opportunities being explored in that area can benefit the rest of the Acton populace, because it's clearly a very important gateway to the wider geography.
It doesn't really make sense. Well, in that case, how come that every single building development in North Acton cites North Acton playing fields as its green space when it is not part of that planning area?
Well, you should be grateful for that, because if we're getting planning obligations from development in a neighbouring local planning authority, that is showing that that collaboration with OPDC is working, because clearly, obviously, there is a deficiency of open and green space within the North Acton area. And so clearly, obviously, if money is going into the North Acton playing fields for upgrades and improvements, that's clearly got to be a good thing, hasn't it?
Steve, I think if you walked around North Acton playing fields during lockdown, before a lot of these things were built, you couldn't move. Everybody is citing North Acton playing fields as their green space. Frowry Park does it, everywhere in North Acton does it. We don't need money, we've got gold-plated grass. What we need is more actual green space. It's becoming a slum with just nothing but concrete. And so,
so Libby, so how do you suggest that would be achieved then, given that government is
everybody,
very keen for us
OPDC
to develop
needs to OPDC, and you need to suggest to them that OPDC needs to grow its own park. We can't go on like this with just concrete. It is dire up there, especially in the hot weather. It's awful, and there is nowhere for anybody to go. I just don't see. It's building slums. There is nowhere apart from the cemetery in the whole of the OPDC area for people to go, apart from coming to North Acton playing fields. You cannot go on like that. I mean, North Acton are playing fields. They're cricket pitches too, and tennis courts. It isn't even a park per se.
Well, I have no locus for setting planning policy, or indeed processing planning applications in that corner of the borough. We have no locus because we cannot set the planning policy for that area. So those are specific issues that would have to be raised specifically with OPDC, which I'm sure you have done and will continue to do so. Actually might have some sympathy with your arguments, particularly in terms of green and open space. I am aware, for example, in some of the plans that they produced for the Old Oak West, particularly I think it's a supplementary planning document, Catherine, isn't it? That does include a significant quantum of green and open space as part of a wider master plan, high level at this stage, for a whole new community on space which is currently safeguarded for the purposes of high speed 2 construction, but will be repurposed once that site is released and the construction process is completed.
We've got the same problem in South Acton as well, with lack of green space. There's hardly any at all. And I just think it's very unfair to expect people to live there and not to build open space into these developments. They're too close together, and it's very poor. It's very poor. And I just think it's cruel to make people live in these things. They've got to have some more green space, especially if we have another lockdown. But that's beside the point. There's other things that, apart from some inconsistencies in what you've written, and it doesn't sort of read properly, I've got notes on, oh yeah, where is your public open space table showing what there is by borough? And the other thing is, the mayor asked for a plan showing the whole of the borough, where the different high towers were, so we can get an overall view. I can't find that. I might just be me not finding it. What are the bills? I've got that. And SIL, also, you didn't mention in your SIL table that the community is supposed to have a say in SIL. If it's a neighbourhood forum, it has a certain percentage say, and if it doesn't have a neighbourhood forum, then it has a less say. And I didn't see that mentioned on your PowerPoint thing that came into it.
Well, you've just asked the question, so I can say more. I thought my presentation was probably overlong as was, but you make a good point. Technically, that is correct. There is obviously a requirement to obviously consult. But in fact, the council is going to be far more ambitious, is my understanding. It's obviously not something which I'm closely involved in the detail, but I know there are some very ambitious plans and proposals for town forums being prepared. And I believe the intention is that once we have a community infrastructure levy, that each of the town forums will have a part to play in helping shape some of the priorities for spending some of that money in the future. So I think that will, in terms of neighbourhood governance, be a massive step forward in terms of trying to ensure that local communities are more involved in ensuring that some of the priorities that we set for some of these spending objectives are agreed more locally.
Well,
And just on your point on tall buildings, a bit surprised at your comment, because clearly, obviously, throughout each of the 84 development sites listed in the plan, we indicate, firstly in the pro forma, whether or not that site is potentially suitable or not for a tall building, and where it is, we then indicate a threshold range, indicating a sort of upper limit, if you like. And if you look at the index map for each of the town plans, as well as a list of each of the development sites, there is a map which shows where they are within the town. And I've highlighted those sites which are, as I say, potentially suitable for a tall building. So that information is there.
Yeah, the mayor just asked for one overall one showing that what the borough looked like as a whole, and I couldn't see that.
Well, I'm not sure
and also,
that specific. What he wanted was to have clarity that we set out very clearly a robust policy in terms of the management of tall buildings, and that we set out those specific locations where tall buildings would be suitable. And we've certainly done that. I certainly don't recall there being anything specific about a single map.
So,
that seems to be.
I mean, can I ask you whether you'll stick to that then?
Sorry?
I mean, can I ask you whether you will stick to the tall buildings? Because we've just had another thing again in South Acton, where it says there should have been, I think, 12-storey, and it's gone above, and it was mitigated by the officer saying that they were going to put in a footpath. That's not a mitigation for a tall building, where it said both in the 2012 plan and in this one going forward that shouldn't be more than 12 stories. So I'm not quite sure that I trust you to stick with what you're saying in the local plan.
Well, thanks very much, Libby, for that comment. I mean, clearly, obviously, we operate in a plan-led system. So clearly, obviously, you would expect me as the head of planning policy to be saying the policy clearly attracts considerable weight and materiality. But of course, in defence of my colleagues in DM, of course, it does not currently get 100% weight and materiality because the plan is yet to be adopted. I would argue as we go through the various gears, particularly after conclusion of this round of public and stakeholder consultation, the plan gains more weight. I would also argue in respect to tall buildings policy that because its parent policy is the London Plan, which mandates and directs us to set out a very clear policy and rationale, it should be probably accorded higher weight than some of the other new policies, particularly around perhaps say climate action at this stage in the plan making cycle. So you are clearly obviously going to get anomalous situations until the plan has been fully adopted, subject obviously to the inspector's independent report in terms of to what extent the plan-led objectives override either existing policy or individual discretion that may have been operated in that particular case. I'm not familiar with it. So you are going to get anomalies, and that's perhaps to be expected, given that some of these schemes would have been subject to quite intense periods of pre-activity and possibly even master planning in some cases, which would have predated the publication of even the Reg 18 policy, never mind the Reg 19 one, which is more focused and specific.
Right. Well, I don't think it's the plan has to go through. I realise that because otherwise, at least if the plan goes through, we have some control. Maybe we have some control of what the plan says and holding the developers to account, because that certainly hasn't happened since the 2012 plan. It wasn't reviewed after 5 years as it should have been, and it's just gone wild. And the 255-storey buildings on the roundabout in North Acton are just dire. I mean, absolute dire. They can't even get out of them if there's a fire because they're surrounded by busy roads. And it's just not fair. We need the housing. I know we need the housing, but it's not being thought through properly. And it's just developers do what they want and we are left with nothing. Again, it's to do with.
Well, I have to say, I'm going to have to disagree with you that developers do what they want. I mean, all of the decisions will be subject to planning permission, which will either be approved by officers, and certainly the bigger schemes will go to planning committee. So to suggest that there isn't a proper decision-making process, which is transparent and which takes place with full public input as part of the consultation and plays out at planning committee, I think it's just not true. Whether or not, of course, the development that's approved is to your liking, Libby, that's a different matter. And clearly, obviously, if you start from the premise that all school buildings should be opposed, then clearly, obviously, you're going to be dissatisfied from time to time, because unfortunately, the policies that we've inherited from government and from the London Plan do require us to look to optimise development, particularly on brownfield sites, and particularly those which are in close proximity to our town centres or have high levels of public transport connectivity. What the policy, though, has sought to do, and it's a shift from where we were certainly before Reg 18, is to take a much more robust approach on tall buildings. We're clearer about design considerations with the Associated Housing Design Guide, for example. We're also clearer about those geographies and those locations which might be potentially suitable for a tall building, and we set a very specific threshold range, including an upper height limit based on design analysis we've done in terms of the scale, height, massing and overall morphology of the proposed development. And that's all set out in Chapter 4 under each of the individual development sites. So I think we've been very clear in the signposting of that and the broad parameters that would be potentially suitable. Clearly, obviously, it's open to the decision maker then to weigh that in the balance alongside other material considerations and the planning balance. But we operate within a plan-led system, so clearly, obviously, those parameters should be accorded considerable weight. I think, have we lost Libby?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, does anyone else want to ask a question?
Yes, yes. Anybody else, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any response, Steve. So maybe then we should just thank everybody, and there will be another chance to hear your presentation later on this evening. And yes, I'd like to say thank you very much. This recording will be available in the next couple of days on the New Local Plan website. And thank you all for your time.
Again, thank you for your continuing interest in the local plan. Hope to talk to some of you in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
I love the seagull, Brienne.